Now for our What in the World segment. World leaders came together in Brazil this week to celebrate. No, this had nothing to do with the World Cup. I'm talking about the 6th annual BRICS summit. The leaders of all the BRICS nations, that is Putin, Modi, Rousseff, Xi and Zuma, all gathered in Fortaleza, Brazil. And on Tuesday, they sent a shot across the bow by announcing a $50 billion bank meant to rival the World Bank and a $100 billion crisis fund to replace the IMF. I can understand why they made this move. You see, these 5 nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, now account for more than 40% of the world's population and almost 20% of the world's total GDP, 17% of global trade. Yes, growth in the emerging markets has slowed recently, but these countries still have become a large enough force in the global system that they want a seat at the table. And that hasn't happened. Their influence in international institutions has lagged behind. Only 2 of the 5 BRICS countries have permanent seats at the UN Security Council, and their collective voice isn't heard much at all at international economic institutions like the IMF, whose head the Europeans appoint, and the World Bank, whose leader is put forth by the United States. As The Economist points out, China, the world's largest economy by some measures, has less voting power in the IMF and World Bank than Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg. Remember, China has 1.3 billion people to the under 30 million people in those 3 European nations. The BRICS leaders have complained about this unfair treatment for years. American administrations pushed to give them greater voices and votes, but the small European countries haggled, and then the American Congress has been its usual obstructionist force. Now, instead of continuing to change the old system from within, the BRICS leaders are trying to subvert it. And this subversion comes on the 70th anniversary of Bretton Woods. That was the agreement signed at a UN conference in the wilds of New Hampshire, which spawned the World Bank and IMF in the first place. Of course, there is all sorts of squabbling and disagreement among the BRICS, but there's one very important thing that they seem to agree on. They envisage an economic future that is both anti-Western in some sense and anti-dollar. Welcome to the New World Order, where we have to accommodate the rise of the rest. If the United States and the West don't do that, others will create clubs of their own to counter the existing system. The IMF has said it will collaborate with the new bank, but is that enough? Well, there's one tangible thing the US could do as soon as tomorrow. It could pass legislation to modernize and reform the IMF. The reforms were negotiated in 2010. They are supported by almost all 188 IMF members. And just this April, the G20 gave Congress an ultimatum of sorts. Pass the reforms to give emerging countries a greater say by year end, or we will move forward without you. Maybe the creation of this BRICS Development Bank will be just the wake-up call the United States Congress needs. But given that it is the United States Congress, I wouldn't bet on it. Next on GPS, the American economy. Is it as rosy as it seems? Is it a facade? And what about Obamacare? Paul Krugman will tell us how he sees things when we come back.